Chapter 1: How to Love Life Today. There are few things humans are more dedicated to than unhappiness. It is as if we were placed on earth by a malign creator for the exclusive purpose of suffering, and we have responded to the task with an enthusiasm worthy of congratulation. Reasons for despair are everywhere: the frailty of our bodies, the fickle nature of love, the insincerities of social life, and the deadening routines of habit. Faced with such constant afflictions, one might expect that the moment of our own extinction would be the most eagerly awaited event of all. In the Paris of the 1920s, a person looking for a newspaper might have chosen L'Intransigeant, a publication known for its investigative journalism, city gossip, and sharp editorials. It also had a peculiar habit of posing grand questions to French celebrities. It once asked, "What do you think would be the ideal education to give your daughter?" And on another occasion, "Do you have any recommendations for improving traffic congestion in Paris?" In the summer of 1922, the paper posed a particularly elaborate scenario to its contributors. It described a fictional American scientist's announcement that the world was about to end, or at least that a catastrophe would suddenly destroy a vast part of the continent, ensuring the deaths of hundreds of millions. The paper asked what effect this certainty would have on people in their final hours, and more personally, what each contributor would do in their own last hour. The first celebrity to reply was Henri Bordeaux, a man of letters now largely forgotten. He suggested the masses would rush to either the nearest church or the nearest bedroom. He, however, would choose a different path, using his last moments to climb a mountain and admire the alpine scenery and flora. Another Parisian personality, the actress Berthe Bovy, coyly expressed her concern that men, freed from long-term consequences, would abandon all inhibitions. Her dark prediction was echoed by Madame Freya, a famous palm reader, who believed people would be too consumed by worldly pleasures to prepare their souls for the afterlife. This suspicion was promptly confirmed by the writer Henri Robert, who cheerfully declared he would spend his final moments in a game of bridge, tennis, and golf. The last figure consulted was a reclusive, mustachioed novelist not known for such pastimes, though he had once tried checkers. He had spent the previous 14 years confined to a narrow bed, writing an exceptionally long novel without a proper lamp. Since its first volume was published in 1913, his book, In Search of Lost Time, had been hailed as a masterpiece. Critics had compared him to Shakespeare and Stendhal, and an Austrian princess had even offered to marry him. Yet Marcel Proust had never esteemed himself highly, once referring to himself as a flea. Even the British ambassador to France, while bestowing a peculiar honor upon him, described him as the most remarkable man I have ever met, because he keeps his overcoat on at dinner. A good sport about contributing to newspapers, Proust sent a reply. He wrote that life would suddenly seem wonderful if we were threatened with death. Our laziness, he explained, hides from us countless projects, travels, and love affairs, which we incessantly postpone because we feel certain of the future. But if all that were threatened with becoming impossible forever, how beautiful it would all seem. If the cataclysm doesn't happen, we promise ourselves we will visit the new galleries of the Louvre, pursue Miss X, and take a trip to India. But the cataclysm never arrives, and we do none of it, falling back into the negligence of normal life where desire is deadened. It should not take a catastrophe, he concluded, to make us love life today. It should be enough to remember that we are human and that death could come this very evening. This sudden attachment to life in the face of imminent death suggests that it is not life itself we have lost a taste for, but rather our daily version of it. Our dissatisfaction stems more from a particular way of living than from some irrevocably bleak aspect of the human condition. By surrendering our belief in immortality, we are reminded of the many untried possibilities hidden beneath the surface of an apparently eternal existence. But if acknowledging our mortality encourages us to reevaluate our priorities, what should those priorities be? The contradictory suggestions from the Parisian celebrities, alpine scenery, tennis, golf, offered few fruitful answers. Proust's own suggestions of the Louvre, love, and India were no more helpful, as they were entirely at odds with his known character. He had not visited the Louvre in over a decade, preferring reproductions to museum crowds. A trip to India, requiring a train and a 10-day sea voyage, was an impossible itinerary for a man who struggled to get out of bed. As for love, he had long been unreceptive to the charms of any Miss X, having concluded that a glass of chilled beer was a more reliable source of pleasure. Even if he had wished to follow his own advice, Proust had little time. Just 4 months after sending his reply to the paper, he caught a cold and died at the age of 51. Despite having flu-like symptoms, he had wrapped himself in 3 coats to attend a party. While waiting for a taxi in a freezing courtyard on his way home, he caught a chill that developed into bronchitis and then pneumonia. Fearing disruption to his work, he refused doctors' advice and their offers of camphorated oil injections, consuming nothing but hot milk, coffee, and stewed fruit. He died a few hours after a burst abscess in his lung. Fortunately, Proust's reflections on how to live were not confined to that brief, confusing newspaper reply. Up to the very end, he had been working on his book, which, in its own complex way, set out to answer a question very similar to the one posed by the fictional scientist. The novel's title, In Search of Lost Time, pointed directly to its central theme, a search for the causes behind the dissipation and loss of time. Though Proust himself disliked the title, calling it unfortunate and ugly, it perfectly framed the book as a practical, universal story about how to stop wasting time and start appreciating life. While the threat of an imminent apocalypse certainly forces such concerns to the forefront, the Proustian guidebook offers the hope that we can address them long before any final destruction. It suggests we might learn to adjust our priorities well before it is time for a last game of golf, providing a way to find meaning without the need for a global catastrophe to focus the mind. Chapter 2. How to Read for Yourself. Proust was born into a family where the art of making people feel better was taken very seriously. His father, Dr. Adrien Proust, was a vast, bearded man with the authoritative air of his 19th-century medical profession, a man whose purposeful glance could make one feel like a sissy. He embodied the moral superiority of a doctor, a vocation whose value to society is unquestionable to anyone who has suffered so much as a cough, and which can provoke a sense of superfluity in those with less tangible callings. Dr. Proust had risen from modest beginnings as the son of a provincial grocer to become a doctor of international standing. After brilliant medical studies, he dedicated his life to public sanitation, traveling widely to advise foreign governments on arresting the spread of cholera and bubonic plague. His efforts earned him the title of Chevalier de la Légion d'honneur and a professorship in Paris. By his death in 1903, he could look back on a life of profound contentment and tangible achievement. It is no wonder, then, that Marcel felt unworthy beside such a father, fearing he was the bane of this contented man's existence. He harbored none of the professional aspirations of a normal bourgeois son. Literature was his only passion, yet for much of his youth he seemed unable or unwilling to write. As a good son, he attempted to find a respectable career, contemplating the foreign ministry, law, or stockbroking, but the hunt proved fruitless. 2 weeks in a solicitor's office horrified him, and the thought of becoming a diplomat was abandoned when he realized it meant leaving Paris and his mother. At 22, he was desperate, wondering what was left for him if he was to be neither a lawyer, a doctor, nor a priest. He briefly found a post as an unpaid librarian, but the dusty air was too much for his lungs, and he began a long series of sick leaves, spent mostly in bed or on holiday, but rarely at a writing desk. He lived a charmed life of dinner parties and extravagant spending, a source of great distress for his practical father. Eventually, after years of failing to show up for work, his tolerant employers dismissed him. It had become clear to everyone, not least his disappointed father, that Marcel would never hold a proper job and would forever rely on family money to pursue his dilettantish interest in literature. This history makes it difficult to understand an ambition he later confided to his maid, Celeste, after his parents had died and he had finally begun his novel. "Ah, Celeste," he said, "if I could be sure of doing with my books as much as my father did for the sick. To do for readers what Dr. Proust had done for those ravaged by plague seemed a monumental, if not impossible, task. What healing could the 7 volumes of In Search of Lost Time offer that could compare to a functioning public sanitation system? To dismiss Marcel's ambition might stem from a modern skepticism about the therapeutic qualities of the literary novel. Yet even Dr. Proust, unsympathetic as he was to his son's vocation, was not hostile to the printed word. He was, in fact, a prolific and popular author himself, far better known in his time than his son. Unlike his sons, however, the utility of Dr. Proust's 34 books was never in doubt. He wrote on everything from the defense of Europe against the plague to the novel problem of lead poisoning in battery factory workers. He was a master of the self-help manual, conveying knowledge about physical fitness in concise, accessible language. His most successful book, Elements of Hygiene, published in 1888, was an illustrated guide for teenage girls, aimed at cultivating a new generation of vigorous French citizens. With great seriousness, he offered advice on the dangers of poor sewing posture, the self-destructive perversity of corsets, and the benefits of unstrenuous exercises like jumping off walls, hopping about, and balancing on one foot. With a father so masterful at aerobic instruction, perhaps Marcel was overambitious in equating his life's work with that of the author of Elements of Hygiene. The question then becomes whether any novel can truly be therapeutic, offering more relief than a simple aspirin or a country walk. One might charitably suggest escapism. There is a certain pleasure in buying a paperback at a station newsstand and losing oneself in a different world, at least until the train brakes squeal and the slate-gray pigeons of reality reappear. But this was not Proust's way, nor was it a method sufficient to fulfill the grand therapeutic ambitions he expressed to Celeste. The best indication of his true method lies in his approach to looking at paintings. His friend Lucien Daudet recalled a visit to the Louvre where Proust demonstrated his habit of matching figures on the canvas with people from his own life. Standing before Domenico Ghirlandaio's Old Man and Boy, painted in the 1480s, Proust studied the kindly face with carbuncles on its nose and declared the man was the spitting image of the Marquis de Lô, a well-known Parisian socialite. It is a surprising connection to make across 4 centuries, yet a surviving photograph of the Marquis, despite the 19th century paraphernalia, suggests a striking resemblance. This possibility of making connections between apparently different worlds explains Proust's belief that the number of human types is so restricted that we constantly have the pleasure of seeing people we know. This pleasure is not merely visual. It means we are also able to read about people we know in unexpected places. Fictional characters become reflections of our own acquaintances. The narrator's lover Albertine, with her laughing eyes and black polo cap, begins to resemble one's own girlfriend, Kate. The hesitant, shy Saniette speaks with the same defensive tone as an old college friend afraid of rejection. As Proust remarked, one cannot read a novel without ascribing to the heroine the traits of the one we love. This intimate communion between our lives and the novels we read is central to his vision. In reality, he argued, every reader is, while reading, the reader of his own self. A writer's work is merely an optical instrument offered to the reader to help them discern things within themselves they might never have seen otherwise. The recognition of what the book says within our own self is the proof of its veracity. Art, in this view, properly affects us rather than simply distracting us from life, a phenomenon that carries with it extraordinary benefits. One such benefit is the feeling of being at home everywhere. Recognizing someone we know in a portrait painted 4 centuries ago reminds us of our shared human nature. People from bygone ages, like the heroes of the Odyssey, cease to seem infinitely remote, like animals in a zoo. We open the gates and realize that their world, despite its unfamiliar names and customs, is essentially like our own. This process also lets us out of the zoo. The experiences of fictional characters provide an expanded picture of what is normal, confirming the validity of our own thoughts and feelings that go unmentioned in our immediate environment. It is comforting to read of a narrator who, like us, becomes nasty in love or says tender things only when he is the one who is not in love. Our own romantic antics seem less perverse, and we feel less alone. Finally, a novel has the ability to put a finger on perceptions that we recognize as our own, but could not have formulated ourselves. We might sense something superior in a person's manner, but it is Proust who points out the precise look of amused astonishment a duchess gives when someone dares to use her Christian name without permission. Reading a book that notices such faint, vital tremors sensitizes us. Our mind becomes like a newly attuned radar, picking up on the hypocrisy of a friend or a submerged sadness we didn't know we felt. The book stimulates our dormant antennae, and as Proust suggested, in the masterpiece of a genius, we are delighted to find reflections of ourselves that we had repressed or scorned, and whose value the book suddenly teaches us. Through this unique lens, the purpose of a novel becomes clear. It is not to escape life, but to understand it more deeply by first understanding ourselves. The seemingly overambitious goal Proust set for himself, to do with his books what his father did for the sick, is revealed not as a desire to cure physical ailments, but to treat the ailments of the spirit, alienation, loneliness, and the lack of self-awareness. His method offers a way to read not just his story, but our own. Chapter 3. How to Take Your Time. Whatever the merits of Proust's work, its most awkward feature is undeniably its length. His own brother Robert once remarked that to have the opportunity to read in search of lost time, people must be very ill or have broken a leg. Confined to their beds, they face not only the sheer volume of the novel, but also the challenge of its individual sentences, snake-like constructions that coil across the page. The longest of these, found in the 5th volume, would, if printed in a single line, stretch nearly 4 meters. This expansive style baffled the gatekeepers of the literary world. In 1913, Alfred Humblot, head of the publishing house Allendorf, glanced at the manuscript and replied, "My dear friend, I may be dense, but I fail to see why a chap needs 30 pages to describe how he tosses and turns in bed before falling asleep." A reader for another publisher, after wading through 700 pages, reported that he had not a single clue what the book was about. Proust was ultimately forced to pay for the publication himself. Even after achieving acclaim, the accusations of verbosity continued. A beautiful young American living in Rome wrote to him after 3 years of reading his work, confessing, "I don't understand a thing, but absolutely nothing. Dear Marcel Proust, stop being a poseur and come down to earth. Just tell me in 2 lines what you really wanted to say." This frustration suggests a belief that Proust had violated a fundamental law, that experience should be related in a number of words appropriate to its significance. The desire to condense his 7 volumes into a neat summary inspired the All England Summarize Proust competition, a sketch in which contestants in swimsuits were given 15 seconds to pre-see the entire novel. The first contestant offered a hurried, general appraisal of time lost and regained before his time ran out, a valiant but failed attempt to capture the essence of the work. The contest, however, remained optimistic that such a feat was possible, if only the right candidate could be found. While summarizing a novel in 15 seconds is unusual, an even more radical compression of life occurs daily in the newspaper. Before his illness grew severe, Proust's breakfast consisted of coffee and a croissant, which he would enjoy while reading his letters and the morning paper. He had complex feelings about this ritual, calling it an abominable and sensual act through which all the world's misfortunes, battles costing 50,000 lives, murders, bankruptcies, and suicides are transformed into a morning treat, a tonic to be savored with a few sips of café au lait. The more an account is compressed, the less space it seems to deserve. It becomes easy to toss the paper aside, sigh at the tedium of daily routine, and forget the tragedies packed into its columns. This was not Proust's way. As his friend Lucien Daudet observed, he read newspapers with great care, and a news in brief told by him would turn into a whole tragic or comic novel. The short, grim items in his daily paper became fertile ground for his imagination. A horse leaping into a tram, a man electrocuted at a power station, a teacher's suicide on the Metropolitan. Each of these would have swelled into a story rich with misjudged nostalgia, thwarted love, or echoes of Balzac and Zola. A sober example of this inflationary method survives. In 1907, Proust read a headline, "A Tragedy of Madness." A young man named Henri van Blarenburg had butchered his mother with a kitchen knife. The story was rendered in a few gruesome lines. Proust might have turned the page with a shudder had he not been an acquaintance of the murderer. He had met the polite, sensitive Henri at dinner parties. In response to the crime, Proust wrote not a few appalled words, but a 5-page article. He placed the squalid tale of dangling eyeballs and daggers into the broader context of Western art, seeing it not as a freak event, but as a manifestation of a tragic aspect of human nature. Henri's delusion linked him to the fury of Ajax. His dangling eye was an echo of Oedipus. The mother's dying cry, "What have you done to me?" was a reproach that, Proust argued, any loving mother could address to her son. For as we grow older, we kill those who love us with the cares we constantly inspire. A story deserving of a few lines in a newspaper was integrated into the history of tragedy, its dynamics observed with the complex sympathy usually reserved for the stage. This demonstrates how vulnerable human experience is to abbreviation. Had we first encountered the stories of Romeo and Juliet or Anna Karenina as news in briefs, "Tragic End for Verona Lovebirds," or "A Young Mother Threw Herself Under a Train," we might have found them entirely unengaging. The artistry of Shakespeare or Tolstoy suggests that their subjects were inherently significant, but there was nothing to distinguish these characters from a somersaulting horse or an electrocuted electrician. The greatness of art, Proust asserted, has nothing to do with the apparent quality of its subject matter and everything to do with its treatment. Discoveries as valuable can be made in an advertisement for soap as in Pascal's Pensées. While the profound aphorisms of Pascal seem worlds away from the frothy bliss of a soap ad, Proust's point was that the advertisement could be the starting point for thoughts no less profound, if one resisted conventional notions about where such thoughts are found. This spirit guided Proust's own unconventional tastes. He found great pleasure in reading a train timetable, not for practical information, but as a novel about country life, its station names providing enough material to imagine entire worlds. This wayward enthusiasm often surprised those who met him. The young diplomat Harold Nicholson, when introduced to Proust at a party, was quizzed about the minute details of his committee work. When Nicholson gave a terse summary, Proust stopped him. Mais non, vous allez trop vite. Recommencez. Précisez, mon cher, précisez." Urged to slow down, Nicholson's morning expanded to include handshakes, maps, and macaroons, the rich, seductive texture of experience that gets noticed only when we don't go by trop vite. Going slowly entails greater sympathy. To mutter crazy at the story of Van Blarenburg is to dismiss him. To write an extended meditation is to understand him. This expansion is just as crucial for non-criminal matters. The narrator's agonizing indecision over whether to marry his girlfriend, Albertine, could be summarized in 2 seconds. His own mother does so in a letter, making his dilemma seem simple. For a moment, the narrator is soothed by this simple account, but he soon realizes the truth lies not in the summary, but in the hundreds of pages he has devoted to charting every shift in his feelings. The lesson is to resist the approach of the publishers and the busy men, to hang on to the performance, and to use 30 pages to describe falling asleep when need be. It is a defense against what Proust called the self-satisfaction felt by busy men, however idiotic their business, at not having time to do what you are doing. By defending its own length, the novel reveals that its method is inseparable from its meaning. The refusal to summarize, to rush past the texture of a moment, is not a stylistic indulgence, but a moral and philosophical stance. It is the very mechanism by which the world becomes more interesting and our judgments more compassionate, transforming the act of reading into an education in how to live. Chapter 4: How to Suffer Successfully. A good way to evaluate the wisdom of someone's ideas is to examine the state of their own mind and health. If their pronouncements are truly worthwhile, their creator should be the first to benefit. This line of thinking would have found an eager supporter in the 19th century critic Sainte-Beuve, who argued that to truly grasp an author, one must ask questions about their life, their religious beliefs, their finances, their diet, their vices. No answer, he insisted, is irrelevant. Yet the answers are often surprising, for however brilliant the work, the lives of its creators are often marked by an incongruous degree of turmoil and misery. This may be why Proust so forcefully dismissed Sainte-Beuve's thesis, arguing that it was the books, not the lives, that mattered. Balzac may have been ill-mannered and Stendhal a dull conversationalist, but their works suffer from none of these faults. It is easy to see why Proust was so keen on this argument. While his writing is serene and sage-like, his life was one of appalling physical and psychological suffering. No sane person would desire to live a life like Proust's, which raises a difficult question. Could a man who suffered so much, who lived such an unexemplary life, truly have anything valid to say? His life was certainly a trial. The psychological problems began with his mother, a woman he always called Maman, with tears welling in his eyes. He claimed, "I was always 4 years old for her." Madame Proust's love was of an intensity that aggravated her son's helplessness. They lived together until her death, when he was 34, and her greatest anxiety was whether he could survive without her. Her concern was never far from bossy intervention, demanding precise details of his sleep, appetite, and bodily functions. His own notion of unhappiness, he once said, was to be separated from Maman. Yet he also sensed a tension, feeling that his mother preferred him ill and dependent. "It is sad," he wrote in a rare outburst, "not to be able to have at the same time affection and health." Then came the slow, difficult recognition of his own desires in an unenlightened France. He was not like other boys, a realization that dawned gradually as he found the prospect of a night with a Walter Scott heroine held none of the attraction of being pressed against a school friend. His mother, who hoped he would marry, was no help. His attempts to find young men who were similarly disenchanted with heroines were met with rebuffs, which he would counter with selective appeals to the wisdom of Socrates and Montaigne. His romantic life was defined by an intense need for love and a tragicomic clumsiness in securing it, a series of fruitless crushes that led to a deep pessimism and pronouncements such as, "Love is an incurable disease." His professional life was no better. A play he proposed about a sadist who torments his wife found no interest in any Paris theater, and when he finally published Swann's Way, he found his friends had either not read it or misunderstood it completely. At 30, he assessed his own life as one of little happiness, without pleasures, objectives, activities, or ambitions. The list of physical afflictions was even longer. Asthma attacks, which began at age 10, could last over an hour, forcing him into a nocturnal routine and a life lived behind the sealed windows and drawn curtains of his flat. His diet became a single gargantuan meal a day, and his digestion was a constant struggle. He was plagued by sensitivities. He couldn't use soap, needed his underpants pinned tightly to fall asleep, and was terrified of mice. He was always cold, wearing 4 jumpers and an overcoat even in midsummer. He was acutely sensitive to noise, travel, and even minor changes in altitude. His life in a Parisian apartment was a hell of pianos, coughing fits, and noisy neighbors. He suffered from fevers, bad eyesight, and a host of other ailments, all while enduring the disbelief of others who suspected he was not as ill as he claimed. For the last 16 years of his life, he regularly announced that he was about to die. Was he an extraordinary hypochondriac? His stockbroker certainly thought so, bluntly calling him a spoilt child whose illnesses were self-inflicted. Yet Proust did die. Perhaps the pain he felt from a simple scratch was as intense for his delicate-skinned constitution as a machete swing would be for another. He was, as a friend said, a man born without a skin. This fragility stands in stark contrast to his brother, Robert, a surgeon built like an ox. Where Marcel could be felled by a draft, Robert was indestructible, surviving being run over by a 5-ton coal wagon as a young man, and later continuing an operation after a shell exploded in his field hospital. Robert had immense physical energy, surgical skill, financial success, and a beautiful daughter. Marcel had none of these things. But in one area, Robert trailed his brother, the ability to notice things. Robert could be run over by a wagon and show little reaction. Marcel was attuned to every milliliter of water swilling in his gut. This points to the heart of Proust's worldview. We do not learn anything properly until we are in pain. Sensory blindness is often welcome, but it is through feeling things, usually painfully, that we acquire knowledge. A sprained ankle teaches us about the body's weight distribution. Being jilted introduces us to emotional dependency. Infirmity, he believed, is what makes us take notice and analyze processes we would otherwise know nothing about. We suffer, therefore we think. He privileged painful thoughts, which arise from distress, over painless ones, which are born of disinterested curiosity. Wisdom cannot be taught. It must be discovered through a personal journey that no one can spare us. Happiness is good for the body, he tells us, but it is grief which develops the strengths of the mind. Only when plunged into grief do we have the incentive to confront difficult truths. From this perspective, the magnitude of Proust's misfortunes is not a reason to doubt his ideas, but is the very precondition for his insights. The knowledge of what it means to be alive seems to be the privileged preserve of the violently miserable. Suffering, however, is not enough on its own. It merely opens up possibilities for inquiry that are most often refused. The true art of living is to make use of the individuals through whom we suffer, to alchemize our grief into ideas. This process of understanding does not absolve us of pain, but it grants us a sense of the bitter logic behind our suffering and forms the basis of a recovery. Too often, suffering pushes us in a baneful direction where we learn nothing. Proust's novel is filled with such bad sufferers, wretched souls who react to their pain with delusion, cruelty, and rage. Madame Verdurin, snubbed by the high society she craves, pretends that all the people who ignore her are simply bores. The cook Françoise, pained by her own ignorance, pretends to know everything. The gaffe-prone Bloch, arriving late and muddy for dinner, launches into a speech about his disdain for punctuality, turning his failure into a willed act. Each of them adopts a ruinous defense mechanism instead of facing their pain. André's mother displaces her social frustration by complaining that the peas aren't soft enough, while Charles Swann, receiving a cruel letter about his lover, wipes his glasses in confusion, missing the opportunity to use his jealousy to investigate the hidden depths of others. In contrast to these unfortunate sufferers, Proust's own approach to his grief seems admirable. He turned his pain into ideas, and despite his romantic disappointments, he could congratulate his driver on his marriage with only the faintest hint of self-pity. The moral is to recognize the wisdom offered in the coded language of our coughs, allergies, and betrayals, and to avoid the ingratitude of those who blame the peas, the boars, the time, and the weather. Thus, the very suffering that seemed to invalidate his wisdom is revealed to be its source, offering a framework for not just enduring misery, but for using it as the primary tool for understanding life. Chapter 5: How to Express Your Emotions. There are significant things to learn about people by looking at what annoys them most. For Proust, a particular source of irritation was the way some people expressed themselves. He would grimace as if a stick of chalk had been scraped across a blackboard when a friend, thinking it chic, peppered his French with English phrases like goodbye or bye-bye. This frustration extended to those who used over-elaborate terms like the Big Blue for the Mediterranean, or lazy, exhausted clichés to describe the weather. His complaint was not grammatical. He boasted of knowing little syntax, but psychological. These stock phrases were insincere, signs of a person wishing to seem smart or in the know, while relying on constructions that showed little concern for the specifics of a situation. When Proust winced, it was in defense of a more honest and accurate approach to expression. His friend Lucien Daudet received an unforgettable lesson in this after a concert of Beethoven's Choral Symphony. As they were leaving, Daudet hummed a few vague notes and exclaimed, "That's a wonderful bit." Proust laughed, explaining that a simple poom 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 could not possibly convey the wonder of the experience. It would be better, he insisted, to try and explain it. This is the central challenge. We feel something and reach for the nearest phrase, but it fails to do justice to our experience. We see the pyramids and say, "That's nice." Such paltry sounds keep us on the outside of our own impressions, estranged from the very feelings that have eluded our casual definitions. The problem is most acute with clichés. When a friend, Gabriel de la Rochefoucauld, sent Proust the manuscript of his novel, Proust gently pointed out that it was filled with phrases that had been used too often. The sky on fire at sunset and the moon shining discreetly are not false ideas, but they are superficial articulations of very good ones. If we repeat them every time we see a sunset or a moon, we begin to believe they are the last word on the subject, when they should be the first. Clichés are detrimental because they feel adequate while merely grazing the surface, and this matters because the way we describe the world reflects how we experience it. In his own work, Proust skirted 2,000 years of ready-made moon talk to offer a fresh metaphor, the moon as a furtive actress in her ordinary clothes, watching the rest of the company from the background. It is an image that captures a genuine personal impression. The temptation to sound like other people is strong. Inherited habits of speech can make us sound authoritative or worldly. The character Albertine, deciding she wants to sound like a proper bourgeois young woman, begins to adopt the expressions of her aunt, much like a baby goldfinch imitating its parents. This mockery of verbal habits explains Proust's frustration with Louis Gondarax, a leading man of letters. Tasked with writing a preface for a collection of Georges Bizet's correspondence, Gondarax produced a work of enormous pretension, filled with pompous phrases stolen from classical writers. He dubbed 1871 that most abominable of all years and Paris the great city, using a caricature of fineness to suggest a literary grandeur he did not possess. For Gondarax, a self-proclaimed defender of the French language, the priority was to follow precedent. For Proust, this was a profound error. He argued that every writer is obliged to create his own language, just as a violinist must create his own tone. Correctness and perfection of style exist, but only on the other side of originality, after one has passed through faults. The only way to defend a language, he insisted, is to attack it, to break the rules to capture what is distinctive about one's own experience. Only that which bears the imprint of our choice, our taste, our uncertainty, and our desire can be beautiful. This need to leave a personal imprint is most evident in our relationships. The better we know someone, the more inadequate their standard name seems. Proust's mother called him my little canary, or my little oaf, and his friends called him bunched, or lecram. He, in turn, called his maid Plou-Plou. These names are endearing symbols of how new words are constructed to capture the unique dimensions of a relationship. The opposite, a reluctance to expand one's vocabulary, reveals a disregard for the world's diversity. People who didn't know Proust well often confused him with another writer, Marcel Prévost, just as a lazy speaker uses a single cliché for every kind of rain shower, neglecting the true diversity of both literature and weather. Speaking in clichés is problematic because the world itself is far broader than stock expressions allow. Proust's novel is filled with people who behave in unstock ways. His Aunt Léonie, a loving woman confined to her bed, entertains macabre daydreams of her entire family dying in a fire, leaving her to emerge as the courageous, moribund survivor. Albertine feels a sudden rush of overwhelming love for the narrator not because of his intellect, but because he has had a very close shave, and she adores smooth skin. These are not perverse thoughts, but normal ones, rarely discussed, that challenge the cliched societal interpretations of family love and romance. This process of challenging orthodox accounts sheds light on Proust's attraction to the Impressionist painters. When Claude Monet exhibited Impression Sunrise in 1872, most viewers saw a bewildering mess. Their notion of reality had been shaped by cliched depictions of harbors. Monet, however, had freed himself from tradition to attend to his own uncorrupted impressions. In Proust's novel, the fictional painter Elstier does the same, painting what we actually see rather than what we know we see, a sky that looks like the sea, a ship that seems to sail through the middle of town. His achievement is to capture the original muddle of perception before reason overrules it. The task of art, Proust suggests, is to undo the work of our habits and abstract intelligence, making us travel back to the depths where true reality lies unknown. This hidden reality includes ships that go through towns, fantasies of family conflagrations, and intense feelings of love sparked by smooth skin. The moral, then, is that life is a stranger substance than cliché allows. Goldfinches should occasionally do things differently from their parents, and there are persuasive, deeply personal reasons for calling a loved one plu-plu, Missou, or poor little wolf. Expression, it turns out, is not merely a matter of communication, but a fundamental part of experience itself, the essential act that follows the difficult lessons of suffering and transforms them into a personal and comprehensible truth. Chapter 6: How to be a Good Friend. What did his friends think of him? After his death, many published accounts of their time with him, and the verdict was almost unanimously favorable. They remembered him as a paragon of companionship, an embodiment of friendship's every virtue. He was generous, insisting on ordering the most extravagant suppers and offering champagne and exotic fruits, telling his companions there was no better way to prove their friendship than by accepting. He was munificent, leaving enormous tips, sometimes as much as a 200% service charge, even in a railway station buffet to which he would never return. His goodness, they insisted, outshone even his generosity. He was remembered as the best of listeners, taking an interest in others' thoughts on sport and motor cars, rather than imposing his own subjects of conversation. He was passionately curious about his friends, happy to see them laugh. Never did his own frenzied work or suffering make him forget them. He put as much of his poetry into his life as he did into his books. He was modest, apologizing for everything from being present to expressing his dazzlingly meandering thoughts. His conversation was bewitching, and one never got bored at his house, where he would move from guest to guest with his plate, ensuring everyone was in an agreeable mood. Given these generous verdicts, it is surprising to discover that Proust himself held extremely caustic views on friendship, believing it to be a shallow and futile activity. The artist who gives up an hour of work for conversation with a friend, he wrote, is sacrificing a reality for something that does not exist. He saw conversation as a superficial digression, and friendship itself as an effort that makes us sacrifice the only real part of ourselves to a superficial self. In the end, he concluded, friendship is no more than a lie which seeks to make us believe that we are not irremediably alone. This was not the view of a misanthrope. He felt the craving to see people, a longing he compared to that of a patient in an isolation clinic. Rather, he was challenging the exalted claims made on friendship's behalf, chiefly that it is a privileged forum for expressing our deepest selves. His skepticism was not born of disappointment with his own friends. It was a universal problem inherent in the nature of friendship itself. He would have felt the same even if he had had the chance to converse with a genius like James Joyce. In fact, he did. In 1922, the two writers met at a black-tie dinner at the Ritz. Joyce arrived late and improperly dressed. Proust kept his fur coat on all evening. Their entire conversation consisted of the word non. Afterward, Joyce joined Proust in his taxi, where he promptly opened a window and lit a cigarette, two acts that were life-threatening to Proust. The two literary giants parted without another word and never met again. The absurdity of the encounter highlights the limitations of conversation. Even if the evening had been a success, with the two men talking until sunrise about art and love, there would have remained a critical discrepancy between their chat and their work. Ulysses and In Search of Lost Time could never have resulted from their dialogue. The mind, Proust understood, is an intermittent organ, generating vital thoughts only between long stretches of mediocrity. Conversation, with its demand for continuous response, makes no allowance for these dead periods. A book, by contrast, is a distillation of the mind's most vital moments, concentrated from across years of bovine gazing. Furthermore, writing is a process of rewriting. Proust did not know what he was trying to say until he had begun to say it. Half of his first volume was rewritten 4 times, his messy manuscript pages a testament to a mind perpetually improving on its original utterances. In the finished book, there is no trace of this process, only the controlled, faultless voice of what he called another self to the one we display in our habits, in society, in our vices. If friendship is not a forum for expressing our deepest thoughts, it might still be a place for our most honest ones. But this, too, is fraught with difficulty. Proust had an unenviable power of divination, an ability to see the pettiness and hidden motives in the human heart that left him with a sad and unflattering view of most people. This heightened awareness of others' faults was combined with a profound low self-esteem and a deep-seated fear of not being liked. His overwhelming priority in any encounter, therefore, was to be liked and remembered. He ruined himself on flowers and ingenious gifts, and he deployed his psychological insight to find the perfect compliment to win others over. It was a strategic effort, and it worked. He acquired an enormous number of devoted friends. Friendship, for Proust, was not for egoistical elucidation, but for warmth and affection. He had little interest in intellectual friendships, caring more that people were kind and sincere than that they were intelligent. In conversation, he abdicated his own interests in the name of pleasing his companions. This is why his friend, a keen rally driver, could gratefully report that Proust often talked with him about sport and motor cars. It was a practice his friends jokingly termed to Proustify, a slightly too conscious attitude of geniality and affectation. He Proustified the courtesan Laura Hayman with extravagant gifts and letters, assuring her she was a divine beauty who could turn all men into devoted worshippers. He Proustified the poet Anna de Noailles, telling her she was a cosmic creator, an Athena whose genius rivaled that of Baudelaire. Was he a hypocrite? Perhaps the disparity was less dramatic. He may have believed few of his own extravagant declarations, but he was sincere in their underlying message. I like you, and I would like you to like me. This exaggerated politeness is simply a heightened version of the insincerity every friendship demands. We praise a friend's terrible poetry or newborn baby not to deceive, but to confirm an affection that might be doubted without the praise. Proust recognized this gap between what people need to hear and the unkind thoughts we can have while still holding them in affection. In life, this gap must be bridged with a degree of hypocrisy. With books, however, we can be honest. If Molière bores us, we can simply put him down. Faced with the conflicting projects of securing affection and expressing truth, Proust came to a radical conclusion. The two are fundamentally incompatible. He adopted a narrower conception of what friendship was for. It was for playful exchanges and lavish compliments, not for telling Anna de Noailles her poetry was bad. This separation is best seen in his relationship with Fernand Gregg, a fellow writer who gave Proust's first book a nasty review. When Gregg later sent Proust his own, very bad collection of poems, Proust wrote him a generous letter of congratulation. But found among Proust's papers after his death was another, unsent letter to Gregg, a far truer and far nastier message. He didn't send it because confronting Gregg would have achieved nothing but alienation. The awkward, wounding truths were better entertained elsewhere, in a private space like an unsent letter or a novel. In Search of Lost Time can be seen as an unusually long unsent letter, the antidote to a lifetime of Proustification, where the unsayable was finally given expression. The less worthy sides of Laura Hayman migrated into the fictional Odette de Crécy. The pride and childishness of Fernand Gregg found their way into Alfred Bloch. Proust proposed that the scorners of friendship can be the finest friends in the world, perhaps because they approach the bond with more realistic expectations. They see friendship as a domain for learning about others, not for lecturing them. They appreciate others' susceptibilities and so accept the need for a degree of false amiability. Rather than militantly pursuing both truth and affection, they discern the incompatibility and divide their projects, making a wise separation between the chrysanthemums and the novel, between the letter that gets sent and the one that stays hidden but nevertheless needs to be written. Chapter 7, How to Open Your Eyes. Proust once wrote of a gloomy, envious, and dissatisfied young man, whom he imagined sitting at his parents' dining table after lunch, dejectedly surveying the mundane scene. Before him lay a knife on the tablecloth, the remains of an underdone cutlet, and a cloth half-turned back. At the end of the room, his mother was knitting, and the family cat was curled on a cupboard next to a bottle of brandy reserved for a special occasion. This dreary bourgeois interior stood in stark contrast to the young man's taste for the beautiful and costly things he could not afford. He felt a deep revulsion for his surroundings, comparing them to the splendors of museums and cathedrals, and he envied the wealthy bankers who could decorate their homes so that everything, down to the coal tongs, was a work of art. To escape, he would go to the Louvre and feast his eyes on the grand palaces of Veronese and the princely lives painted by Van Dyck. Touched by this young man's fate, Proust proposed not a change in fortune, but a modest alteration to his museum itinerary. He would lead him away from the galleries of Claude and Veronese to a different part of the museum, to the works of Jean-Baptiste Chardin. It was an odd choice, for Chardin painted no harbors or palaces. He painted bowls of fruit, coffee pots, kitchen utensils, and slabs of meat. His human figures were rarely heroic. They were reading, building a house of cards, or returning from the market with bread. Yet, for all their ordinary nature, Chardin's paintings were extraordinarily beguiling. A peach was as pink and chubby as a cherub. The insides of a skate, slit open and hanging from a hook, were like the naves of a polychrome cathedral. His canvases revealed a harmony between objects, a world at once recognizable and wonderfully tempting. After an encounter with this art, Proust had high hopes for the young man's spiritual transformation. Dazzled by this opulent depiction of what he had called mediocrity, he would no longer feel excluded from the aesthetic realm or envious of bankers with gold-plated tongues. He would learn that common crockery could be as beautiful as precious stones. His own parents' humble flat would gain the power to delight him, and as he walked through the kitchen, he would say to himself, "This is interesting, this is grand, this is beautiful," like a Chardin. Proust tried to get this essay published, explaining to an editor that his study showed how great painters are the ones by whom our eyes are opened, initiating us into a love of the external world and coding our most modest moments with charm and wisdom. The editor, however, turned it down. The moral, perhaps, seemed too close to the ridiculous, suggesting that a hovel was as nice as a villa. But Proust was not urging an equal value on all things, but rather their correct value, encouraging a reappraisal of beauty that would allow for a new and rewarding relationship with salt cellars, crockery, and apples. The immediacy of our aesthetic judgments can fool us into thinking they are natural and unalterable. We simply feel moved by palaces, not kitchens. But Proust implied that our sense of beauty is not immobile. It can be educated. If the dissatisfied young man failed to appreciate his family's tableware, it was from a lack of acquaintance with images that could show him the key to its attractions. Great painters possess a unique receptivity to visual experience, the play of light on a spoon, the velvety skin of a peach, and through their mastery they point out these neglected qualities. Chardin's work was a call to look not only at the pageantry of Venice, but also at the bowl on the sideboard and the dead fish in the kitchen. This happiness that emerges from taking a second look is central to Proust's therapeutic vision. Our dissatisfactions often result not from any inherent deficiency in our lives, but from our failure to look at them properly. The young man in the Chardin essay was a precursor to another dissatisfied Proustian hero, the narrator of In Search of Lost Time. Both suffered in a world drained of interest, and both were rescued by a vision of their world in its true, unexpectedly glorious colors, one vision from a gallery, the other from a bakery. The narrator, sitting at home one dreary winter's afternoon, is given a cup of tea and a madeleine. The moment the warm liquid and crumbs touch his palate, an exquisite pleasure invades his senses, and the vicissitudes of life become indifferent. The cake is the kind his Aunt Léonie used to give him during his childhood holidays in Combray, a childhood that has grown vague in his mind. By a quirk of physiology, the taste, uncorrupted by later associations, carries him back, introducing him to a stream of rich and intimate memories. He recalls the old gray house, the parish church, the flowers in the garden, and he recognizes the worth of these memories. The Madeleine helps him realize that it wasn't his life that was mediocre, but the image of it he possessed in his memory. We judge our lives disparagingly, Proust suggests, because we form our judgment on these poor images, which preserve nothing of life itself. The vivid images of involuntary memory, jogged by a taste or a smell, stand in contrast to the imprecise facsimiles produced by the voluntary memory of the intellect. What separates them is infinitesimal but critical. like the difference between a good and a bad painting of spring. The bad painter may be a skilled draftsman, but he misses the elusive details, the pinkish border on a blossom, the gnarled quality of bark, in which the true charm of the season is lodged. The narrator's voluntary memories of childhood were similarly lifeless, lacking the awareness of light on a square, the smell of a bedroom, or the aroma of fresh asparagus. Our failure to appreciate things stems not only from inattention but also from exposure to unhelpful images of beauty. As a boy, the narrator's desire to visit the seaside resort of Baalbek is shaped by antiquated, medieval Gothic images of stormy seas and wailing seabirds. When he arrives to find a sunny modern resort with hotels and parasols, he is bitterly disappointed. His holiday is saved by the painter Elstier, who, like a modern Chardin, opens the narrator's eyes to the beauty of the contemporary world. He points out the creamy softness of yachts in the bluish haze and the elegance of women at the racecourse. He updates the narrator's images of beauty, emphasizing that beauty is something to be actively found, not passively encountered. It requires us to notice the details, the whiteness of a cotton dress, the color of a jockey's coat. This praise for an unsnobbish, democratic vision of beauty sits uneasily with Proust's own taste for ostentation and aristocratic friends. Indeed, he was at first attracted to the ostentatious life, but the end of the story is what is important. He was disappointed by glamour when he found it. The images that had instilled the desire did not match the reality. His narrator experiences the same disillusionment. Drawn to the aura of the Duke and Duchesse de Guermantes, whom he imagines as figures from a stained-glass window, he is shattered to meet them and find them coarse, trivial, and dull. The lesson is not to abandon the search for superior people, but to become better at discriminating. The category of aristocracy is too crude a net to catch refinement, which is unpredictably allocated and may well appear in the guise of an electrician, a cook, or a lawyer. As Proust himself later concluded, his driver had more class than many dukes. Simple images are attractive in their lack of ambiguity. Palaces mean happiness, a university degree means intelligence, but the world is more complex. The valet who speaks lovely French reminds us that refinement is not conveniently tethered to its image. The moral is that we should not deny the bread on the sideboard a place in our conception of beauty, that we should restrain our expectations of dukes, and that we must learn to open our eyes to the value that lies waiting in the modest and unexpected corners of our lives. Chapter 8. How to be happy in love. Would Proust really be someone to consult for advice on romantic problems? Perhaps, in spite of the evidence from his own life. In a letter to André Gide, he outlined his credentials, claiming that while he was incapable of securing happiness for himself, he possessed a unique gift for procuring it for others. He had reconciled lovers and cured invalids, a success he attributed to a capacity for self-forgetfulness and an exclusive concentration on his friend's welfare. He even felt that had his own character Swann known him, he could have shown him how to bring Odette round. And while Swann and Odette's story is a tragic one, the misfortunes of fictional characters should not be mistaken for an author's final prognosis for humanity. Trapped inside the novel, they are the only ones unable to derive the therapeutic benefits of reading it. He did not believe that love could last forever, but this was not a limit specific to love. It was rather a symptom of the general difficulty of maintaining an appreciative relationship with anything or anyone that was always around. The problem can be seen in the unemotive example of the telephone. Bell's invention was at first a supernatural instrument, a miracle that left people amazed. Proust himself acquired one and enjoyed the theater phone, service that allowed him to listen to live opera from home. Yet he noted how quickly the marvel faded. By 1907, a mere 31 years after its invention, the telephone was used without a thought to summon a tailor or order an ice cream. A technological wonder had become a household object, and people reacted with childish ingratitude if the line was busy. If a machine could lose its luster so quickly, it points to the profound challenges faced by comparatively humdrum human beings in seeking lifelong appreciation. How long can the average person expect to be fully appreciated? Sometimes as little as a quarter of an hour. As a boy, the narrator longs to befriend the beautiful Gilberte. When his wish comes true and he is invited to her house for tea, he is happy, but not for long. The vague, chimerical dream, once realized, quickly loses its magic. The warmth of Gilberte's manners and the luxury of her tea become familiar, as unremarkable as trees or clouds. The reason for this neglect is habit. We are, in the Proustian view, creatures of habit, and we only really know what is new, what strikes our sensibility with a change of tone, before habit substitutes its pale facsimiles. The dulling effect of habit is best explained by a remark about Noah's Ark. As a child, the narrator pitied Noah, locked away for 40 days. Later, he came to understand that Noah would never have been able to see the world as well as he did from the ark, even though it was shuttered. Seeing, in this sense, is not just visual contact. True appreciation requires us to recreate an object in our mind's eye. For 600 years, the world was always present to Noah, so he had no incentive to recreate it internally. But once he was locked away, nostalgic and deprived of sight, he would have been forced to focus on the memory of bushes and mountains, and in doing so, he would have begun to see them properly for the first time. This suggests that physical presence is far from ideal for appreciation. It encourages us to neglect things because we feel the work is already done. Deprivation, then, quickly drives us into a process of appreciation. The lesson is not that we must be deprived, but that we should learn from what happens in a state of lack and apply it to conditions of abundance. If long acquaintance with a lover breeds boredom, it is ironically because we do not know them well enough. The initial novelty gives way to the routines of communal life, which delude us into a fake and dull sense of familiarity. This is the very state Noah was in for 600 years, until the flood taught him otherwise. From this follows a piece of dating advice. The most bewitching response one can give is, "No, this evening I shan't be free." The rebuff creates an absence, an incentive for the suitor to focus, the dating equivalent of 40 days at sea. This benefit of delay is demonstrated in the appreciation of clothes. The Duchesse de Guermantes is rich and can have any dress she desires sewn for her instantly. Albertine, however, is poor and must spend hours studying clothes, dreaming of a particular coat. The result is that while Albertine has far fewer clothes, her understanding and love of them are far greater. Poverty, by creating an interval between desire and gratification, fosters a genuine and detailed knowledge. Physical possession is only one component of appreciation. The rich, whose wealth fulfills their desires instantly, are cursed, for they have no opportunity to suffer that interval which allows love to develop. For paintings in Dresden, hats, dressing gowns, or someone who isn't free this evening. This leads to a distinction between what we think we want and what truly satisfies us. A prostitute, by being always available, offers a man what he thinks he wants, physical attainment, but this very availability threatens the gestation of love. She is unable to foster the doubt and delay that are necessary for real desire to take root. The Duchess fails to appreciate her dresses for the same reason. Easy physical possession fools her into thinking she has acquired what she wanted, distracting her from the only real form of possession, which is imaginative. This is the possession Albertine pursues naturally as a response to being denied. In the Proustian scheme, it is impossible to love someone physically. Our bodies, he suggests, lack the essential organs for the task. He uses the disappointment of kissing to illustrate the point. We approach a kiss hoping to savor and possess an entire person, but our lips are ill-equipped. The narrator's first kiss with Albertine promises a moment of resolution, a way to savor everything she represents: the summer, the sea, her youth. The reality is a clumsy encounter with a squashed nose and no view, a mere touching of the sealed envelope of a far more elusive person. The disappointment lies not with the person, but with the limitations of the physical act itself. What then is the secret to a long-lasting relationship? Infidelity. Not the act, but the threat of it. An injection of jealousy, Proust argues, is the only thing capable of rescuing a relationship ruined by habit. The fear of losing a partner forces us to see again what made us love them, but his characters are inept at capitalizing on this. When jealousy strikes, they seek only to re-establish physical allegiance, another kiss with a horny tusk. which brings temporary relief before boredom sets in once more. If Proust could have advised these unhappy lovers, he would have sent them to think about Noah and his ark, to learn the lessons of absence and imaginative appreciation. But perhaps the wisest person in his book is the one who, when asked her views on love, curtly replies, "Love? I make it often, but I never talk about it." Chapter 9. How to Put Books Down. How seriously should we take books? For a man who devoted his life to literature, Proust manifested a singular awareness of the dangers of taking them too seriously. He believed one could have a very lofty idea of literature while also having a good-natured laugh at it. A healthy relationship with books, he felt, depended as much on an appreciation of their limitations as of their benefits. The benefits were something he knew intimately. In 1899, at the age of 28, things were going badly for him. He was ill, living at home, had never earned any money, and a novel he had been working on for 4 years was going nowhere. That autumn, on a holiday in the French Alps, he read and fell in love with the works of the English art critic John Ruskin. The encounter was transformative. The universe suddenly regained infinite value in my eyes. Proust explained, because Ruskin was a genius at transmuting his impressions into words, articulating things Proust had felt but could not express. Ruskin sensitized him to the visible world, awakening his senses to the exquisite arrangements of curved lines in a mountain stream, or the beauty of the great cathedrals of northern France. Proust was particularly moved by Ruskin's minute description of a small, vexed-looking stone figure, no more than 10 centimeters high, carved into a portal of Rouen Cathedral. For Proust, Ruskin's concern for this little man was a kind of resurrection, bringing a neglected aspect of experience back to life from the deadness of habit and inattention. So impressed was Proust that he set aside his own novelistic projects and became a Ruskin scholar. Though he hardly spoke English, he undertook the immense task of translating Ruskin's works, producing highly accurate versions of the Bible of Amiens and Sesame and Lilies, complete with scholarly footnotes. He worked with the fanaticism of a maniacal professor, a development that pleased his mother, who had long hoped he would find an academic career. And yet, he did not become Professor Proust. His reservations were subtle. He forcefully defended reading against the idea that it robs us of our independence. On the contrary, he argued, there is no better way of coming to be aware of what one feels oneself than by trying to recreate in oneself what a master has felt. We should read other people's books to learn what we feel. In the process, it is our own thought we bring out into the light. But herein lay the problem. Books, in his view, could not make us aware of enough of the things we felt. They could open our eyes and enhance our powers of perception, but at a certain point, inevitably, they would stop. There would come a moment with every book when we would feel that something was incongruous or constraining, for the stark and simple reason that the author wasn't us. After 6 years of living with Ruskin's texts scattered across his bed, Proust had a burst of irritation, exclaiming that for all his qualities, Ruskin had frequently been silly, maniacal, constraining, false, and ridiculous. This frustration was not unique to Ruskin. It was a universal dimension of reading. For the author, a book may be a conclusion, but for the reader, it is an incitement. Our own wisdom begins where the author's leaves off. Reading, he concluded, is on the threshold of the spiritual life. It can introduce us to it, but it does not constitute it. It becomes dangerous when, instead of awakening us to our own inner life, it takes its place, when truth becomes a material thing, deposited between the leaves of books to be passively consumed. He gave an example of a man, unlucky in love, who comes across an aphorism by Le Bruyère that seems to crystallize his experience perfectly. The man reads it over and over with immense joy, but this very enthusiasm distracts him from the particularities of his own feelings. The aphorism is close, but not exact. It is a symbol of how even the most brilliant books can leave the nuances of our own lives behind. An over-reverent, over-reliant approach to reading can lead to a range of symptoms. The first is that we mistake writers for oracles. As a boy, Proust had thought the author Théophile Gautier was a wise custodian of truth who could advise him on everything from Sophocles to career choices. In time, the same exaggerated hopes were harbored of him. Journalists from L'Intransigeant repeatedly bothered him with nonsensical questions, such as what manual profession he would choose, to which he gave the nonsensical reply, "I think I would become a baker." Another symptom is that a good book can silence us, stopping us from thinking for ourselves. Reading Proust nearly silenced Virginia Woolf. "My great adventure is really Proust," she wrote. Well, what remains to be written after that? The book's perfection made her feel her own work was insipid and worthless. It was only by ceasing to read him and recognizing that one person's achievement does not invalidate another's that she was able to find space for her own scribbling. The most insidious symptom is artistic idolatry, the revering of artists for the wrong reasons. This involves focusing on the objects depicted in art rather than the spirit of the art itself, forgetting that a picture's beauty does not depend on the things portrayed in it. Proust's friend Robert de Montesquieu would gush over a dress if it resembled one described by Balzac, his enthusiasm having everything to do with Balzac's name and nothing to do with his own aesthetic judgment. The same idolatry can be seen in the temptation to cook the specific dishes from Proust's novel, using a recipe from La Cuisine Retrouvée. This misses the point that the spirit in which the food was considered is what matters, a spirit that could be applied just as well to a bowl of curry. The most telling example is the pilgrimage to Illiers-Combray, the town where Proust spent his childhood summers. The town now markets itself with his name, selling madeleines and suggesting that the magic of the novel can only be experienced in this privileged place. But this is to privilege the place where Proust happened to be over his manner of seeing. The beauty he revealed is latent in almost any town, and had his aunt lived elsewhere, we would drive there just as unfairly, speeding blindly past other towns without ever learning to see them in a Proustian way. It should not be Illiers-Combray that we visit. A genuine homage to Proust would be to look at our world through his eyes, not to look at his world through our eyes. The moral is that there is no greater tribute we could pay to a great writer than to pass the same verdict on him as he passed on Ruskin, that for all its qualities, his work must eventually seem silly, constraining, and false to those who spend too long with it. Even the finest books deserve to be thrown aside.